Welcome, everyone. US Chinese relations are undergoing a period of coldness that some consider to be a clear indication of the start of an era of multipolarity in international relations. At a time when the United States was involved in seemingly endless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, China was developing its technological and economic capabilities. Today, China is imposing itself as the world's second foremost economic power, not to mention its advanced military capabilities. Stopping the spread of Chinese dominance on the world stage has become a priority in American foreign policy, and preventing China from intruding on American interests has become a preoccupation for many think tanks and institutions specializing in international relations. For today's show, I am pleased to host Mr. Tom Sauer. Tom is a former enlisted Marine Infantryman, a 2006 graduate of the US Naval Academy, an 18-year Naval and Marine Corps veteran. Tom is the chairman and majority owner of the MacArthur Group Incorporation and CEO of its subsidiary company, Miramar Recovery, which is operating 4 locations and leading 50 professionals in Orange County, California. I used to live in LA too. Tom, it's so great to see you. Welcome to Newslooks.
Thank you, Adele, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So for my first question to you, wanted to get your assessment of the US-Chinese relationship, US-China relations. Has China really become a threat to the interests of the United States?
I think there's absolutely no question. The Chinese have every intention, and they have for a very long time, of becoming the preeminent superpower in the globe. And I think it's just quite obvious, and it's not necessarily from a military standpoint. It is from an economic, financial, cultural standpoint as well, and we're seeing it everywhere. Quite often the Chinese refer to the 22nd century as the Chinese century. And what's really interesting is that the Chinese really play the long game. Most people in the West, particularly in the United States, and from a political perspective, economic perspective, they don't think past the next election cycle. And really, right now, the Chinese do. They are an eternal culture. They've been around for a very, very long time. And there is very much a cultural attitude within their own zeitgeist that we've always been here, we always will be here. And they believe that they've suffered from 100 years of humiliation at the hands of the West, and they lump the United States, Great Britain, and the Western powers all together. And they look at this as their return to greatness from hundreds of years ago. And right now they are on track to do exactly that.
You bring up such an interesting and valid point. In Chinese culture, the concept of mian, saving face, right? Mianzi. That is true. It's all about being able to save face in front of the world. And I'd say even risk economic loss in order to maintain what they think is their reputation. So very, very good to point that out. Recently, a meeting of the so-called Quad Group was held at the White House, which included the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and India. China watched the meeting with caution, of course. In your opinion, can this alliance be considered an attempt to besiege China? And what are the mechanisms of this so-called blockade?
Well, Adele, I believe it is meant to be a counterweight against China and many of their other initiatives, but I'm afraid that it might be too little too late unless there is a real drastic change in our attitude in relation toward the Chinese. And furthermore, I believe that with China's One Belt, One Road initiative, where obviously they have massive supply lines, they have tons of money, they're manipulating their currency, they are offering, they give predatory loans to African countries so they can exploit their natural resources. After the United States loses the war in Afghanistan, who's swooping in right now to get all those natural resources, right? Which is a bigger deal than most people will want to give credit for. Furthermore, with their dominance and their expansion in the South China Sea, the 9-dash line, which is part of the South China Sea, which they claim is their historic territory. And I think it's just worth pointing out, furthermore, that I'd to say that actually required reading would be, for anyone on this topic, first would be Michael Pillsbury, The 100-Year Marathon. And I'd also recommend Asia's Cauldron by Robert D. Kaplan. And I also recommend The Tragedy of Great Power Politics by John J. Mearsheimer. And what's really interesting about those, especially Mearsheimer, is now we're entering into this possible multipolar world, right? Where during the Cold War, we had very much a bipolar world where you had the United States and its NATO allies and the Soviet Union and their Warsaw Pact allies, right? Or tributary states, whatever you want to call it. But at that time, at least, to think of the model that Mearsheimer uses, where it was this bipolar, where even though could be really catastrophic if things went south, it was stable, right? And then now when you introduce a multipolar world, right, where you have multiple regional hegemons, not just a global, one or two global regional hegemons. Now you've got the United States here, now you've got the Chinese, and now you have the European Union, which generally gets along with us, but not always. And then now you look at other states that are similar, not quite tributary states, but you look at North Korea, which is a buffer state for the Chinese against South Korea, US friendly democracy. Now you introduce India, right, which is the second most populous country in the world and such a fast growing economy, right? And then that's a massive power. And then even in the Middle East, you've got the regional hegemons of Iran and Saudi Arabia, who are constantly fighting proxy wars against each other. It becomes much more dangerous, much less stable. And when everyone talked about Fukuyama talked about the end of history, right? The end of the Cold War. It's like, this is it. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually getting far, far worse and far, far more dangerous. So now when you look at the Chinese, they see this. And when you mentioned a Chinese word, right? Well, there's another one. I'm no China speaker, right? You have to talk to my buddy, Jack Posobiec, for that one. But you want to talk to about a Chinese word, we talk about the word shi, which is what they refer to as encirclement, right? As when they feel that you're posturing against them. That's the same thing as launching an attack in their eyes. So it could get dangerous. But again, I think it's worth pointing out that this conflict that we're going to have with the Chinese, it's not a primarily military conflict. It could be. I hope it's not. But, and especially because it would be really ugly for a lot of people, including us. But, like I mentioned earlier, I'm broadcasting right now from the United States Naval Academy, my alma mater, where I can say right now, if there ever is a shooting war that were to occur between us and the Chinese, the men and women who are going to fight that war are here right now. They're in that building. They live right over that building, right outside that window. And they're going to class right now over there, learning about the strategy, the tactics, hopefully. We hope they're being prepared for this fight, because right now, if we're to go down here anytime soon, without any real changes, I can't say that we're going to win. So that's, and I'm not trying to sound defeatist. I love my country. I love the United States Navy and the US Marine Corps. I mean, they're the best institutions, that they've done so much for me. But I'm worried right now that our current state as a country and as a military institution, our economic institutions as well, there needs to be a real change real quick, because the Chinese are ascending as, like they talk about the Thucydides trap, where you have a dominant, preeminent power, and then there's a rising power. Eventually, they're going to collide. So that was a very long-winded way of telling you that, yes, I do believe that is something, but I'm really afraid it's too little too late.
Yeah, and it's interesting because China did recently launch a long-range, I think, ballistic missile, and I think it's not so much necessarily the fact that it has such long range capabilities, but more so that what if they were to attach an EMP device, for example, and completely dismantle our grid? That we're not fully prepared for that kind of an attack, and so it is a multifaceted, potentially, war to be fought, not just militarily. You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, it is. It's really, and I think where this potential Cold War that we are in, even nobody wants to admit it, I believe that it can be and should be fought and won economically. Now that requires, what does that require? A decoupling from China, right? Where do we get, the devices we're talking on right now, where were they all made, right? Obviously, I think about that. They're made with slave labor, by the way. And that's one of the things we need to kind of really talk and think about, and how we're going to gain that economic independence, form our own economic alliances. And also, there's so much money that financial institutions here in the United States are taking from the Chinese, and they're very good. They're very tricky about being a couple degrees, several layers removed from it quite often. But yeah, you see it now. And so many of our financial and economic institutions have been rotted to the core and have become corrupted because of money.
Yep. You did mention the South China Sea, of course, and the Open Peninsula. And I just want to say it's known that China has built many artificial islands in the South China Sea, and its planes have flown over Taiwan. What is your opinion on the strategic importance of the South China Sea to America? And what is the value of Taiwan in the US-China conflict equation?
I think quite simply is just that I think it's something like 3/4 of the globe's commerce travels through the South China Sea, and that's it right there. I could be wrong about that, but I mean it's as far as within a degree, but it is a ridiculous amount of the world's commerce travels through there throughout the South China Sea. So that's why it's important. And furthermore, the Chinese consider that to be their territorial waters, as in like you're actually in our own backyard. We have sovereignty over it. And what they're doing is they're trying to establish a precedent by building on coral reefs, establishing landfills and militarizing that area to make it look like as it is their own territory. And then what they also have done, they've turned their coast guards and fishing unions into militias that harass Filipino, Malaysian, Indonesian, and Vietnamese fishing boats. And they really turn into this like armed militia of fishing boats. It sounds crazy, but that's what they're doing. And also they challenge the United States and our partner allies when they conduct what they call FONOPs, freedom of navigation operations, where basically what the United States will do is they'll fly their aircraft or their ship or drive their ships through an area that the Chinese have claimed as territorial waters, but no, they're not. They're international waters, they're recognized. And we do that basically. And what it really is, it's us challenging them. I don't know how effective it is, but think of it as, if let's say you got a neighbor you're not getting along with, right? And you've got your front yard and then you've got the sidewalk that's public space. Well, if all of a sudden that neighbor's a jerk, says, hey, this sidewalk's actually my property right here, and all the traffic goes through it and the road is too. Well, what we're really doing is we're walking up and down their sidewalk and up and down their street with a gun in our hand saying, hey, this is ours. This is public property, walking around public property. That's what we're saying we're doing. Now, will that really be effective? Is that going to stop them? No. I'm more of a believer in like the Italian school of politics, where really all sort of politics is just a rationalization for their own power. And the Chinese think that way. I don't know if we really do.
Well, I think historically we've seen many US presidents obviously have been proponents of, rightfully so, building up a strong military and military apparatus. And it's not so much, necessarily because we're going to go to war. And that leads into my next question, but it's being prepared. It's having the image, because only when you have that kind of deterrent can you ensure peace will come. So that said, we know that it's more than likely that a military confrontation between the United States and China isn't going to happen. It's unlikely to happen for several reasons, right? But, what are the cards left for the US decision makers to limit the Chinese role in the world?
I would say the cards that we have are primarily economic, intelligence, and information warfare as well. So, some might say that, hey, they've got all these advantages, but, the United States has some game too. We do. And a lot of it we might not see happening everywhere. But that's where a lot of things are happening right now in the intelligence espionage world. But right now, the Chinese are eating our lunch. But we've gotten some game, and there's some things that might be happening behind the scenes that, I have friends in the intelligence community, and we're doing some things here and there. But I'd say that especially when it comes to things like the South China Sea or Taiwan, right? Everyone keeps talking about the possibility of something happening with Taiwan, and for China, Taiwan is very much more about national identity and national pride, because they consider that to be that renegade province. And everyone always talks about some Chinese invasion of Taiwan. It's not possible, at least right now. I can tell you that. You don't need to take my word for it. They don't have the sea lift for it. They don't have enough ships to be able to land an army on that island. At least not yet. And even if they did, it's an incredible, people don't realize, they talk about the stopping power of water, how difficult it is. Think about how difficult it was for the United States, Great Britain, and Canada to invade France just across an 11-mile stretch of water, right? That was really difficult. It's not any easier now. I would say most likely if Taiwan were to be annexed or taken over by the Chinese, it very well could happen, but most likely it's going to happen willingly. Right now, there's something like 40 flights a day going back and forth between Taiwan and the mainland. And there's these financial, economic ties. Absolutely. And I think probably the smart move for the Chinese is to, instead of, invade and take over the barrel of a gun, is to persuade and to essentially bribe them. And I think that's what's most likely going to happen.
Economic incentives work, just like sanctions work. Economic incentives.
That's absolutely correct.
So money talks. during the era of President Donald Trump, we witnessed the beginning of this economic war with China. And I just want to ask you, was President Trump right in his plan, and why?
I think he absolutely is. But I think, again, it might have been too little too late. And that's really what it comes down to. At least he was somebody who was calling it out and putting a focus on saying, hey, identifying the problem. Hey, this is a problem. We need to do something about it. Now, what actually was able to get accomplished, I don't know, because most of the Trump administration was just fought internally, was just fighting constant lawsuits, impeachment, and everything like that. And it was attacked on all sides. And guess what? There's a reason for that, right? Like, and now we have an administration like, look, it is plainly obvious that the people who are in the White House right now and their staff have been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. Simply have been financially, I don't need to get into the receipts, but it's there.
Yeah, it is interesting to see kind of the a different tone and a softer kind of approach to China this time around. And you may be very right in terms of the Chinese having some maybe information on the current admin.
It's true.
Tom, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome, and your knowledge of China is something that looking forward to sharing more in subsequent interviews, and we hope to host you again in the future for sure. I also want to thank you for watching, everyone who's tuned in, and invite you to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. I'm Adele Nazarian, and we look forward to seeing you next week with a new guest. Goodbye for now.